in the last episode, we had a crack at fixing this corner. Today, we're going to move on to fixing this flange along the back. Hi, I'm Dave. Welcome back to 65 Fab. While we've now got a reasonably solid frame all the way around, we have to get in eventually and repair the rest of these corners. But rather than tackling the inside first, because I think they are probably going to be the most difficult, particularly getting around the internal corners, I think what we'll try and do today is I'm going to have a go at making the flange that will go all the way across here in one piece, and we'll just gently curve it around to meet. I was tempted to leave, and I still am tempted a little bit, to leave this tiny bit of material in the middle, because this is one bit that's not too compromised and would give me a reference. I still need to decide on that, but for now we keep it in place and we use that as our pattern to work out how to actually make this whole piece, hopefully, or maybe in one go. In some senses, this flange is actually a pretty easy piece to make. We'll fold it straight around in the handbrake. I can then soften that by looking at finding a nice dolly that fits, and in fact this one does, and we'll hammer from behind and actually turn what is a sharp curve into a nice rounded curve, and we'll see that as I go. But what I'm hoping is that if we make a single piece of metal to go around here, just with a small amount of stretching on the outside after we've put this curve into it, we should be able to just get it to match the curves. This is going to be a little bit more difficult. It depends how much we can stretch. Worst case, we'll have to go and make this side as a separate piece. But certainly at this end, we can leave that. We've got this as our pattern, and we'll stop about here and cut it in. But as you can see, in some areas, this is at least half of the material. This goes all the way up. I'm going to try and keep as much as possible of this middle bit because that's good steel, and then we go up again to about halfway across. So what I'll do is we'll cut a sheet of steel that we're going to get ready to make the flange with. We'll make it oversized and then cut it back to what we want. So the first step is to cut our steel strip that we'll use to make the flange. To do that, we're going to use the newest addition to our arsenal, which is this foot press manual guillotine. So this will give us a nice square cut. We'll just put it in, cut the strip, and then we can put it through the pan brake and bend it up. Well, perhaps I shouldn't have done that in time lapse, because if you blinked you would have missed it. But we now have our nice strip. It's pretty much even, well, it is even up and down, nice and straight. So we'll now use this strip to form our flange. So all we're going to need to do here, really, the main thing is to fold this flange over first of all, this little bit at the corner. To do that, we don't really need a pattern for this, but what I've tried to do is to basically just use this little bit of cardboard, this way, to get a feel for the angle we're dealing with. This is sort of so damaged that I barely know where the angle is going to be. So I've sort of gone around to various different places, and what I'm looking at is to try and see, as a middle ground, where do I think that flange is going to sit? We can always adjust it a little bit later, but I want to get it as close as possible. So, first thing, this is about 20 centimetres across here, 20 millimetres across here. So what we'll do is we'll just fold the flange into the piece of steel, into the strip, based on the angle that we've got here, this little angle, and then we'll soften that flange down on the dollies. So, let's do that. I've now scribed a little, just a very fine scribe mark with 20 millimeters on the side here, because that will actually be our flange, and I think it's easier. While I could leave more and cut it back later, I think if I actually bend it on the flange, then I've just got to worry about top and how much steel I'm going to leave around the top body of the frame, basically. So I've got that scribe line, and I'm going to keep the scribe line slightly, I don't know whether you can actually see the scribe here, but I'm going to keep that just out from the teeth, so that I've sort of got 20 millimeters plus a little bit, and that gives me enough room for that curve to come around when we hit it with the dolly. So let's do that now. I'm also not putting this onto time lapse because it doesn't take long at all, and it's probably worthwhile actually being able to see what I'm doing. So I'm putting the shorter end under. That seems to be better from a grip perspective, to stop the piece popping out. Basically what I'm doing is moving it under here so I can now see pretty much the entire scribe line, albeit pull that forward a little bit more. I want to see the scribe line just in front of the teeth. That's about right. So then I lock it down quite firmly, and we simply, now we're using the entire 1200 millimeters of this machine, so this will take some bending, and I don't want to pop it back out. So I'm just going to take my time here, and we'll just bend it a fraction at a time, just relaxing each time to bring it around. Now, to bend something that's 1200 millimeters wide, we are working at the edge of what this machine can do without popping it out. So let's see how our angle's going. There's my little piece. A little bit more. There's some pressure under that, I can tell you. Okay, let's see what that looks like. Gosh, that actually came up with a pretty reasonable curve. Gee, it's not bad. If anything, I've probably gone a little bit too far, which is okay. Oh, see, it's almost perfect in the middle there. A little bit too far on the edges, but by the time we dolly this, it'll all come back pretty much into alignment. If you look at the outside here, I don't know how well you can see it, but because there's actually about a 2 millimeter offset at the moment set on the back, the teeth, between where the teeth and the actual brake are, there's about a 2 millimeter offset, and what that's actually done is given us a reasonable curve to start with. It's sharper than we're going to want, but that's easily fixed, and we're going to do that next. But this is good. This is a good start. So what we'll do now is run it through with the dolly, and we'll start getting it into the correct curve. I have no idea whether there might be a better way of doing this. There probably is, and if somebody can put in the comments any ideas you might have. My technique for softening the curve here is really, so it's a technique I came up with when I was working on the GQ a while back, and I was making the little drip rails around the side, and I needed to keep the curve nice and straight but also reasonably soft. So what I've discovered, or the technique I use, is basically to get a dolly that matches the right size of the curve, and in fact this one in this case matches the curve that we're trying to create on this flange, and then using that dolly I start by using the pan brake, as we just saw, to give me a nice straight line. If I tried to do something like this in the bead roller, keeping it straight through the bead roller, even using a fence in the back, can be pretty tricky, whereas I know we've got a nice straight line here because that's our starting point from the pan brake. And now I'm able to just work my way along and take what is quite a sharp corner here, and just flatten it out, and I just use this nylon hammer, and and I basically just bring the curve around. It takes a while, but you bring it around and you end up with the curve that matches the dolly. So that's what I'm going to do now. It's going to take a while, so I'll put it on time lapse, and even then, I promise you, there'll only be a little bit of on time lapse. So I'll get into it. Well, just quietly, it's a lot of work, but even just with that first pass across the top, we've started to soften the curve down a little bit now. So what I'll be doing now, again with the hammer, is just basically working it across like this. So I'm just going to keep rocking it as I just gently start to work it out. So again, it's going to take a fair bit of time, but pretty quickly we can get to a point where the curve should match quite closely with what we've got here for the flange. Well, I'm sure there is undoubtedly an easier way to do that. I just haven't found it yet. I know that if I had a power hammer, that'd be a good problem to have. But with a power hammer, you could, in effect, set up a pair of dies and just run it through, and you'd get that curve perfectly. But not having a power hammer, this seems to work okay. Certainly, when I've just checked it against the flange, the piece of the frame itself, this actual curve is pretty close already. So what I'm going to do is just quickly run it through the planishing hammer, just to sort of straighten these edges out. And then I'll come back, and I just want to do a little bit more just to make sure this curve's nice and smooth. But then we're getting pretty close, and we'll start seeing if we can actually shape the flange to match the piece. Apart from a few very minor nicks where my aim was off a little bit on the dolly, all told, this curve has come up pretty well. And if I measure it against parts that we know, you can actually see in here that the curve is pretty close, all told, to the shape we're going to want. It certainly looks like it's close to this one. But really, this is guesswork because we don't have much to go on. So the next thing we're going to do now is we, in effect, have our flange, which sits under here like this, and now we've got to bend it. So we'll basically curve it across the top and then see if we can put some sharper curves in, particularly down this end, and see how it goes. If not, we'll just have to cut it and we'll do it in two pieces. But that's the next step. So a bit of very gentle shrinking and stretching, and see if we can get this thing to sit where we need it to be. This machine here is our shrinker stretcher. So basically using the foot pedal, it brings these jaws in together, and the jaws, as they close, either open up to stretch the material or they'll shrink to pull the material in. So what we end up with, I've got this fitted now with stretching dies, and so what that'll do is it allows us to basically curve a flange. So we're nice and flat in this direction, but I've just done a little bit of stretching and you can see that it curves around. And that's what we need for curving our big piece of steel here. This one, we just want to apply gentle curves to get it to go around the flange. So we're going to go around the frame. So we're just going to apply a little bit of gentle stretching, and that'll give us that curve. What I'm going to try initially is I want to see whether or not, well, in fact, just how much we can stretch around the corner. So this is actually quite a it's a substantial curve there, substantial bend. I don't think that the stretcher is going to be able to get that much of a curve, but maybe we can go close and do the rest by hand. So that's what I'm going to try initially. I just want to see, starting at one end, basically, because if I bugger it up, I can always chop it off, and we've still got enough length here to do the rest of the frame. But that's what I'm going to try initially, just to see how much can we stretch around the corner, and also importantly, what effect does this rounded edge have on the stretching? Does it get in the way? Does it buckle? I really don't know, but we're about to find out. Well, take a look at that. It was actually, I had to back off a little bit because it was turning so quickly. I felt like I was going to split the steel. We've got the flange has moved out a little bit, so I'm going to have to hammer and dolly that back. But if we have a look, that did a hell of a curve really quickly. So here we are now, sitting it into place, and we've almost got it. I mean, that is really, really close. I've got to get the flange. You'll see how the flange is pulled down by the stretching, but I should be able to hammer and dolly that up pretty successfully now. And that was much more effective than I thought it was going to be. So I'll get on to getting it flat again. You can actually see here how it sort of slopes down, but I'll give it some hammer and dolly and see how it comes up, but going in the right direction. We've now got the first corner flange sitting really quite well. It's quite flat all the way along. Still need to add a little bit more curve here. But as you can see, the actual curve has come up really well. But we know that the flange leans back slightly into the frame here. And that's easy from this perspective. But here, when we get the corner right, of course the flange, this steel here, is sitting too far forward. So we need to push that back a little bit. And the way I'm going to do that now is I'm going to swap the shrinker stretcher to use shrinking dies instead of stretching dies. And then I'll basically very gently start to put some shrink through here to hopefully pull that in. So I want to get this corner exactly right before I move on to trying to do the rest of the curve. So I'll go change the dies to shrinking, and we'll give it a shot very slowly so I don't bugger this up. Well, I just put the patch corner through the planishing hammer just to sort of smooth it down a little bit after shrinking around this top edge. And I've got to say, I'm a bit shocked and pleasantly surprised at just how well that's fitting the corner. I'm going to have to now, bring the top here, this edge, bring that in a bit flatter. But at the end of the day, that's sitting really well. I'm a little bit in shock. But what I'm going to do now, rather than have the camera on and off the whole time, it gets a bit boring. What I'm going to do is I'm going to continue on now, just between a bit of stretching along this bottom edge, tiny bits of shrinking maybe here, although I don't think I'm going to need very much. And I'm just going to keep going and just basically bring it and take it all the way around to the other end. So yeah, I think there's still going to take a lot of adjusting and a lot of very gentle manipulation here of the steel, but I'll keep going, and I'll come back once the overall patch is a little bit closer, but we're certainly going in the right direction. And just like that, it's 2.5 hours later. We've now got the piece fitting pretty well end to end. Certainly it's leaning back the way we want it to lean. It's all sitting quite flat along here. I've had to actually shrink a fair way along here too, just to sort of pull it in as I sort of stretched down the bottom and shrunk up the top. That's because when I looked closely, there's actually a slight curve here, which we need to maintain, because if we don't, then we won't be able to put the skin on, because I'm going to assume that the skin that sat on it, while I haven't actually picked it up to check, another plane overhead, if it's got the curve, this needs to match it. So it took a fair bit to actually get this curve back into shape, but for the most part, we're pretty good, and we're sitting on the corners. I'll cut this off later because we're only really going to go just to the beginning of where it starts to turn here, but I've built the corner around and it seems to be sitting pretty well. So really the next part for me is to work out how am I going to clamp this into place and carefully cut it so that we maintain this entire shape. But that's going to take a little bit of thinking, so lead me to it and I'll come back and we'll see where we get to. Just as a first step, I've put a series of clecos in, because that way it's all holding into place now without any clamps, and allows me to see underneath and see how closely we're fitting. In fact, if we look at this corner from behind, it's really pretty close, so I'm happy with that. In the middle here, there's probably a couple of millimeters here from a movement perspective, but not too bad, and I even think ultimately our little curve is not far from what it was. Arguably some of these areas look like maybe the original curve was a little bit sharper, but I think that might be just because it's so weak it's kind of folded over. But then as we look around, we've got nice close fit. So what I need to do now is work out how much of the metal do I cut out, and then how do I hold it all in place so that I can basically weld it without allowing it to twist. So I've put the clecos in areas where it's actually good steel. So in fact, none of this steel behind the clecos will be cut out. But that's easy, we just go up later and we just fill the cleco holes in, just weld them closed. But at least this means that as I take the patch on and off, it's always landing back in the same place. And so I think what I'm going to do next is cut out the material the compromised steel, cut that out so I see what we're looking at. I'll then put the patch back on and we can scribe from the inside and get a patch that will fit pretty much perfectly, hopefully. The trick then, of course, is going to be, while that all sounds good in theory, once I cut the patch, we no longer have the clecos in place. And I know that Fitzy's Fabrications, he does a thing called cut and butt, where he'll actually leave the clecos in place, and then as he's going, he sort of cuts it and he MIGs it in. But we're going to be TIGging this, and it's going to be pretty difficult because we're going to want a super close fit. So it's going to take a bit of thought. Not sure exactly how I'm going to go about doing it, but at least if we know the patch is about right, I'll cut out the steel now and let's see what we're dealing with. and this is what we've ended up with. So all told, you know, it's come up okay. We've got it welded in, and it's relatively flat. There's actually a lot of dents along the top here that were already in it, so at some point I'm going to have to go back and actually work my way through. But really, as far as now having replaced the entire top section, I'm pretty happy with that. You know, I'm sure there's a lot of work I can do to try and get this a bit flatter and take out some of these old dents as well. You can actually see here where the weld meets the steel of the hinge bracket. You know, and it's actually changed temperature, so it was a bit hard getting the very thin steel to match up to this. And all told, while that was just a very short bit of you know, time-lapse video, the reality is I'm still very much a novice TIG welder. This has taken me all day to get to this point. By the time I've welded it in, as soon as I kept hitting the old steel, I blew so many holes in it and had to go back and patch them up. So it was an extremely slow process, and I guess it's just experience and practice, and I'll gradually get better. You know, I'm happy with the outcome, but it took a brutally long time. You know, so all told, I think it's not too bad. You know, a little bit more work as far as taking out these dents. It is actually reasonably flat. I've dollied that out a fair bit, so it's not too bad. And we're getting there. So now we have the outside frame done. We've got this corner done. Still got to come back and do this bit of a shocker at some point. But the next steps are going to be to repair these inner flanges. I have to give some thought to this, you know, about how I'm actually going to get around and fix these corners. But I'll keep thinking about that. And, you know, all told, we're getting close. Certainly, you know, I'm happy that we've got a fair bit of strength back into this frame now. Just to finish off this episode, I thought it might be prudent to actually make sure that the skin still fits on the frame, particularly given how much of the frame we've now replaced. So I've gently fitted the skin back on, and I'm pleased to say that in fact it does fit. It seems to sit in the corners. We've maintained our curve pretty well. Well, still some work to do here. Overall, on the skin, we can actually see here that this part of the skin's actually good, and it curves, has a little convex curve. Convex, yes. But this part here, where it's all rusted on the inside, these have collapsed. So we're going to have to replace that and get that curve to sit nicely like this centre one. Of course, that's future Dave's problem, but for now, at least we know that the skin is going to go back on, as long as we don't muck anything else up. So, thanks for joining me. That'll do for this video, I think. Please hit subscribe, hit like if you can, and we'll see you next time. Thanks for joining me.